locavore states of the 50 states. New Hampshire was 13th last year. It's third this year after number 1 Vermont and number 2 Maine. And I believe that all 6 New England states are in the top 12 of US states in terms of their various locavore characteristics. And you can find out more about that. And I think it's partly, at least, and perhaps significantly, the work of our town agricultural commissions in upwards of 25 or 30 different New Hampshire towns that has played a great role in putting us into that third position, along with our neighbors, Maine and Vermont. We have an additional speaker tonight, which you'll hear about a moment. But first of all, I want to mention that the usual team has returned. Myself, John Carroll, and I serve on the Durham Agricultural Commission. I've been privileged and honored to be the MC for these programs from the first one in January. And we also have with us Joanne Curran-Celentano, Professor of Nutrition at UNH, as has been the case in recent weeks, and Ted McCormack, Executive Chef of Blue Moon Evolution in Exeter, who is here to comment on the preparation of these various foods as well. Tonight we have 3 speakers, so we're going to try and work this in between roughly now and 8:15. Joel Miller has returned, and Joel will be speaking to us this evening on the subject of eggs. And then, of course, Donna-Lee is with us to speak on the subject of raw goat milk, cheeses, and yogurt. And then we have a only recently announced addition to this evening, Jock Barth from Lee, who is with Poppers and who is here to talk about pork and also about poultry. So it should be a very, very full evening. And I think that perhaps we should begin with Joel. And Joel will be talking to us a little bit on eggs, and then we'll move on from there. Joel?
Thank you, John. I'll just talk about what goes into the production of an egg on our farm, and if you were to go about it at your own house. You'd want to start with, they call it brooding to start off chicks. Ideally, the best way to start, I'd say, would be to have a broody hen. A lot of us might not have access to a broody hen, and certainly the easiest way to start is to get chicks. You can either get them from a farmer nearby, you can get them from the hardware store, or from Agway or something. Yeah.
Really?
You can. In the spring, most of these places will carry chicks. The spring is also the time when hens will start to lay eggs and sit on them, which is what we mean by going broody. And the benefit of having a hen that will go broody is, well, one, most of the commercial breeds nowadays won't actually sit on an egg. They know how to lay an egg, but not sit on it and hatch out a clutch. But the benefit of that is, well, one, your hen is laying the eggs, and she'll take care of them, she'll rotate them, she'll incubate them, and she'll hatch them. And then as they're in their young and real tender stage, she'll keep them warm for you, which is a big part of raising chicks without a broody hen. It's a big trial, is keeping them warm and teach them how to be chickens and how to forage and how to take care of themselves and all. But beyond that, even if you don't have access to that, what we do on our farm is we order in chicks. Typically we're on like a 2-year rotation or so. We get about 100 to 200 chicks at a time, and simply because we couldn't manage that many to hatch that many out. We're not set up for it, and it's just simpler and more straightforward for us to do it this way. Mostly because we don't farm strictly for eggs. We grow vegetables and other things, and chickens fit in nicely to our whole system. But to do that in this way, we've got to consider a few things. Housing is really important. Temperature is really important. Clean feed and water. all these things are considerations for when the chicks come home. We try to have housing ready before they come home. Usually how it works for us, we order from a hatchery and they'll come to us through the post office. Before we even get the call from the post office, we try to have the brooder ready. For us, that could be, we don't have a specific brooding space. Sometimes it changes. We have a spot in the barn or a spot in the greenhouse, whatever's available at that time. But generally you want it draft free, you want it dry, protection from predators, really important, and heat. For the first week or so, well, yeah, for the first week you want them kept around 90 to 100 degrees. We've always found the best way to judge that. You could have a thermometer in there to monitor this, but we use heat lamps typically, and you can usually watch the chicks, and if you've got them set up, the heat lamp set up in the brooder, the chicks are all crowded under the lamp, well, it's probably too cold. So you put another one and they'll spread out a bit. Or if you've got chicks all smashed into the corners and panting, it's probably too hot. They kind of show you how to regulate. You gotta, with most things, just pay attention. You can observe their needs. A main concern with baby chicks is the worry of coccidosis, which is a bacteria in their gut which is there naturally, but can, if elevated to too high levels, can be very fatal in chicks. You can buy, to take care of that, you can buy a medicated feed, or we don't do that. What we do actually is, for the first few weeks, we incorporated a little bit of apple cider vinegar into their water, that and also molasses for energy, just to get the acid levels in their gut. That's always worked really well for us. Typically, the first week between 90 and 100 degrees, and then every week thereafter you can reduce about 5 degrees on the temperature, and again, kind of observing is the best way to figure that out. Until about 5 to 8 weeks, the chicks will start to feather out. At that point, you can drop off the heat. They can insulate themselves pretty well at that point. Especially if you're doing this in the spring, which ideally the outside temperatures are a bit warmer. We have done it in the dead of winter. You can do it. It just adds another challenge. Baby chicks don't like being cold. The nice thing I think about doing chicks in the spring also is that you've got about 6 months from hatching until they start laying eggs, approximately, depending on the breed. Some breeds last, some more. But if you hatch in the spring, by the time it starts getting warm enough outside, we try to get them outside on the ground within about 5 or 8 weeks, certainly. And then if you can have them out, they start to get into the soil and scratching around and doing a little foraging. It's really good for their immune system, as with all of us. The sooner they're outside, the better, I think. It's certainly how we try to manage it. Around 1 month or so, they start to need roosts. They'll like to perch up at night and roost up off the ground. That's their natural behavior. Let's see. There's a whole bunch of different breed options, depending on what you're trying to do, your goals. Again, since we're producing commercially, we've picked a brown egg laying hen that we really enjoy, called Isa Browns. They've been really gentle, and good egg layers, and good health and longevity, which are things we try to shoot for. They're also good foragers. We try to manage our chickens out in the field as much as possible. They rotate around during the summer, which really offsets feed costs, as well as keeps them happy and healthy. And it's our version of manure management, because instead of having a coop to clean out, we move them around the fields and they spread it naturally. And that could be done in any different amount of ways. It could be as simple as just an A-frame with chicken wire on it and an open bottom of the coop, and you'd move that around daily. Or what we do is we've got a four-wheel wagon that travels around just because of ease of moving. Because one day it could be on one side of the garden, and the other day it could be out in the pasture. And we work it into our overall fertility management because chickens, beyond the benefit of their eggs, have a very nutrient-rich manure, which, when used properly, can be really beneficial to our soils and to our crops. The other, and again, obviously, the benefit of having them out on the grass, foraging and whatnot, they've got access to much more protein, much different protein sources than what you get through commercial feeds, which are mixed. Most commercial feeds are mixed for egg production, and that they'll maximize egg production. But the more variety of things you get into a diet, the better, I think, the better quality the egg comes out. We certainly see that, especially you can see differences from the summer to the winter. When they're out in the pastures all summer, you get a much richer, brighter yolk. But in the winter, we try to supplement that with whatever we can, whatever greens we can get, it could be from the high tunnel or whatever. But yeah, most commercial feeds are typically the simplest way to go. They come in 50-pound bags from the feed stores, usually pre-mixed for the optimal nutrient requirements of the birds. Or you could, if you're really doing a lot, you can buy in bulk. The other option is just whole grains, which would probably want to be ground to some extent to make it easier for the chickens to digest. We've done a little bit of that, but you also want to make sure you've got enough calcium. One thing is a laying hen's body is producing there's so much calcium going into her eggs that you have to keep a high calcium in her feed as well as a high protein content. Which, when we've experimented with whole grains a little bit and didn't do as good a job as we should have. And if your calcium levels aren't high enough, you can gradually see their eggs get weaker and weaker and weaker until they start laying eggs with no shells at all. So, but if you know what you're doing and you mix your feed right, it's certainly a viable option. I think some people in town are working on that. John at Copple House, I think, is working on that right now, growing your own whole grains and grinding and mixing for your layers, which is a really neat thing, and I hope that continues more. But for the most part, getting pre-mixed feeds is going to be the simplest and most efficient for most people option of feeding. Besides moving the house around like we do, for manure management, you're going to want to keep good bedding in the houses. We like to use a really high carbon bedding. Wood shavings is great for an older hens. Though any bedding you use will tend to cap over, and the more you can keep incorporating stuff and mixing it, the more you'll get decomposing for you. And again, the manure can make really very high quality compost if you can manage it well. So it's a matter of deciding how you want to manage it. One of the main setbacks for a lot of home flocks, or the main, I don't know if it's a setback or sort of just a consideration to consider, is molting, which any adult hen will typically do at least once a year. This is what you hear of in the fall. They'll go into their natural cycle of shedding their feathers and growing new ones. They'll tend to decrease or almost stop egg laying at that point, which is really frustrating if you're putting a lot of money into feed and need to see eggs come out. But this is also a point for them to sort of build up energy and regain nutrients and get ready for laying again. One way that we manage that is adding lighting in the wintertime. The molting is mostly brought on by length of day. As the days start to get shorter, the daylight decreases, they're going to naturally decline in egg production. And so what we do, we end up doing is we have a light on a timer that'll come on early in the morning, so that in the morning they wake up, say 2 or 3 in the morning, to a timer, and then it goes off at 6 or 7. And in the evening, we just let the natural light fade out so they can find their roosts and rest up, and then in the morning they get woken up. And about 14 hours a day seems to keep them laying pretty well, which is, it's funny for us because it seems like our egg market picks up in the winter sometimes, certainly since other vegetables aren't available, which time naturally egg production is going down. But through keeping a light on them, we've been able to keep them producing through the winter, and also they don't seem too stressed from it, and they seem like we're able to keep them healthy this way. This winter we had our chickens in the greenhouse, one of our unused greenhouses, which is great because they get also a lot of natural light, which is also really good for the birds. Winter watering is a consideration, is a really important consideration. The nice thing about bringing them into the greenhouse is they're right in next to our frost-free hydrants. But we do always change water daily, but you're going to want to, there's more consideration in the winter, certainly, especially with a bigger flock. We use a little bit of heating on our buckets to keep them from freezing. Watering chickens in general is kind of tricky because typically if you've got any water source on the ground, the chickens they'll make a mess of it real quick. We've got some 5-gallon buckets that have little nipples hanging off the bottom. Just a simple setup we got, that you drill these holes in the bottom and hang these nipples, and the bucket hangs up in the air and the chickens come underneath and peck at them, and it dribbles water out. So it keeps the water clean, and we just wrap some heat coils around that bucket and keeps it frost-free for the winter. But that can be a real headache if you're not prepared for it. And also egg washing too is something to consider. It depends how many birds you're planting. You want to have a space that can handle that many eggs if you're doing more than just a few. And that all ties into your goals, whether your egg production is just for the family or if you're doing it for sale, and that could just be to your family and neighbor and friends, or just for the house. But we typically count on every hen in her good production years giving about 2 eggs every 3 days or so. It's not quite an egg every day. Some breeds you could maybe expect that. Some breeds, again, probably expect less. But 2 eggs every 3 days or so is a pretty good mark to consider, which equals about 200 eggs a year, or about 20 dozen eggs a year per bird in their prime years. So that can add up if you're just raising for the family. A couple birds can add up pretty quick. But by prime years, I should say, the first year, what we call, they're called pullets, sorry. Like I say, they don't start laying until about 6 months or so. So for that first 6 months, they're just growing, they're building up strength and feather and learning how to be chickens. And then from 6 months to about 1.5 years is their pullet year. They say it's sort of the best year of production for a hen. And that's when we see these sort of numbers. And hen will continue laying for 2, 3, maybe even more years. But after a certain amount of time, they will start to decline. We typically keep hens till the fall of their second year, when we'll either sell them as layers, or we'll butcher them as soup hens. An old hen can be quite tough meat at that point, but it makes a wonderful soup hen. And for somebody just wanting to do a home flock, just a couple birds, buying 2-year-olds might be a really great way to go, because they may not produce a ton of eggs, but they're still have a lot of years in them, and they'll still lay eggs. But for us, on a high production, and we try to keep them every 2 years. We get a new batch coming in and an old batch heading out, and it works. It seems to work well for us. We try to, and that at some point we overlap there, and you want to make sure that the young ones don't get picked on by the older ones. Typically, we'll put the young ones into the house first and make sure they're well established, and then introduce the old ones after that, so the young ones have sort of a home turf advantage. And when we move chickens, we try to move them at night if we have to move them to different coops or housing. That way, that's when they're most docile, and in the morning, they wake up and almost don't realize anything happened and just go about their day. But yeah, so there's a lot of pecking order things to consider within the chicken house. That's where the term comes from. So that's the general gist of egg production at our farm, and there's a lot of fine details about coop sizes and roosting sizes and nest box sizes and everything, which we could get into, but you're just as well to find that. It may be one of the books you could get from the library. It looks like they've got a lot of books on this over there. And raising chickens is really fun. It's probably one of the easiest things to get into for livestock for a small acreage, even large acreage. They require minimal housing. Chores can be done fairly quickly, and for minimal effort, you can have really superior eggs to what you can get elsewhere, and have a lot of fun doing it. Happy to answer questions whenever everybody's done.
Thank you very much, Joel. That's a good reminder. Lee Library has provided a number of books over here for your perusal. Take a look at them before you leave this evening. Next, we have Jock Barth, also on the subject of poultry, but adding the subject of pigs and pork as well.
It may be that I just talk about pigs. My name is Jock Barth, and I'm trying to figure out how to raise and grow food on Birchill Farm with my two parents, my two kids, and my wife. And I will be candid with you. 10 years ago, it never would have occurred to me, it would be unimaginable to me that I was getting up 7 days a week to feed pigs and cows and chickens and the other things that are associated with that. But we're going into our 7th year, which right up front makes me a total novice at this, a neophyte, a true beginner, scratching the surface of figuring out the knowledge and experience to farm. When people ask me, what do you do on your farm? I say, mostly, I make mistakes. But you live and learn. I think it was, 3 or 4 years ago, our cow had a nice young steer calf, and I didn't know how to castrate it, so I called Chuck Dill, who's a real farmer, knows what he's doing, lives down the road, and on the appointed date he showed up and to do the deed, and I ran around and separated the steer from its mother and got it into a paddock and pinned it with a hog panel and flipped it over, and Chuck came over, turned around and left. I said, Chuck, that's a lot of work to not bother to castrate my steer. And on the way out through the gate, he turned his head back and said, your steer is a heifer. As I say, you live and learn. And so notwithstanding my proclivity to error and a total lack of common sense, I am happy to say in the last 3 years, as a family, the 6 of us, we've managed to raise probably a little over 90% of our beef consumption, 90% of our poultry consumption, 100% of our eggs, and 100% of our pork, and a little bit of this and that. So we're slowly figuring it out. And I will, just say, I'll spare you the story about why we ended up doing this, but I noticed, looking at the email sent to me, that this presentation was integrated with the Lee Library, and I did bring, I'll just say that about 10 years ago, the notion of where my food comes from, how it comes to me, was very much in my mind and my father's mind through just a personal experience. And we started to read, and I did bring some books. They look like they got some great books over there, but some of the things that really brought us into this are books like Omnivore's Dilemma, Fast Food Nation, book I'm reading now, which is about the merits of trying to maintain and discover heritage and heirloom breeds, is called Taste Memory, written by a guy in Portland, Maine. He's just traveled the world. In defense of food, the end of food. But I'll tell you, what I never anticipated when I picked up these books years ago was being in the same room with the guy who wrote them, which is, I picked up the books from John Carroll, which are here as well, Real Dirt, Pastures of Plenty, which give a historical overview of food centralization away from the culture of food that we had. But what just impressed me and moved me so much in reading these books was its compelling and defined pathway to a present and a future of sustainable, decentralized food security and a food economy here in this town, in this community, and in this region. And I'll tell you, it's funny standing here, but these books, very much moved my family to do what we're doing, which, again, is been a weird trip. I'll just tell you that one of the things we've really focused on in terms of both a hobby intensity, but also our entrepreneurial effort, has been pork, and that was what I was asked to address. There was a piece on poultry. I think we're limited for time. We do raise our own meat flock. We raise an egg flock. We did about 250 duck last year, primarily for the Poppers experiment. We do turkey and geese. All of those raise some sub-issues in how you handle that. I think, given the time constraints, I'll just focus on what we're doing with the pork. First, just breed selection. And let me start right back up front and say, this is what we do. I'm not suggesting it's anywhere near the only way. There's a lot of different ways to do it, a lot of different reasons to do it. We have focused on heritage breeds. What are heritage breeds? It's the corollary to heirloom. The heirloom would be applied to vegetables and fruits. Heritage generally is applied to livestock, which predated intensive industrial confinement agriculture. These are primarily, it's a rough term of art, and there's debate and argument about which one is heritage and which one isn't. But bottom line is the breeds that we have selected are Old English breeds, which easily fall into this number of heritage. That these were breeds that were developed for small scale homestead type farming. Certainly they fell out of favor because they do not lend themselves in a number of characteristics to confinement intensive industrial agriculture. Why? I'll get into that a little bit. So why did we go towards heritage breeds? One, we just see a value in maintaining the genetic pool of livestock, that modern agriculture is intensifying breed selection of vegetables, fruits, and livestock intensely. We just think it's prudent to maintain a gene pool. Is that enough to raise an animal? I would concede probably not. The real issue and the real reason we selected heritage breeds is pork. It's flavor. In my opinion, and again, this is subjective, it's up for debate, that the modern pig, I think, is grown for one primary reason. It's rapidity of growth, because that makes it profitable. The faster it gets from piglet to a grocery store near you, the more profit it's going to be for the raiser. The collateral consequence of rapidity of growth, in my opinion, is a not very great tasting pork. When the industry came out a number of years ago and said, oh, this is the other white meat, I think there was a marketing spin on what was ultimately a negative consequence of rapid growth. That is hyper lean dry meat that is not marbled. It should be the other red meat. And in fact, the breeds that we select for, we are looking for a deep marbled ruby red, rich Old World pork flavor, and that's what we find in these breeds. The three breeds we selected, and again, there's a number out there. It's a Gloucester Old Spot, which is a very old English breed. The royal family still breeds them. The Tamworth is probably the oldest English breed, and it has some very primitive characteristics. And the large black is probably the rarest, both English and American heritage breed. One thing to caution if you're going out and looking for a heritage breed to raise is this, that while I'm looking for a marbled meat, what does that mean? It means it's got fat in it. The breeds can tend towards obesity. This can affect litter sizes, but it also can affect the integrity of I think, prime cuts, the hams, unless you make modifications in feed, giving it more roughage, bringing it off of grain. But the other way we're doing it is simply we're using the purebreds as our breeding stock, but I'm really after, at this point, a hybrid that brings about the best characteristics of each. What I've found is the large black and the Tamworth bring really nice pork characteristics. The drawback, I think, from the large black is it was originally what they call a lard pig. I mean, lard was an agricultural product. People were looking to produce copious amounts of fat. I ain't. I'm looking for we do produce lard and utilize it at Paupers, but to me, I'm looking for good prime cuts. And so the other aspect of the large black, by the way, which has brought it into disfavor as a purebred, is the bone structure is very large and reduces yield, and I think affects prime cuts of things like the ham and the Boston butter shoulder. What's great is the cross really does bring out the finer bone structure of the Tamworth and the beautiful meat qualities and taste of the large black. I'm finding that as well with the Gloucester Old Spot. So that's why we go with the heritage breeds. The other reason are kind of subjective, abstract things like temperament. It's got to be nice. If it's not nice, it's the early bird special at Paupers, because I'm in there dealing with is not having a confinement operation, and I'm in there dealing with large animals. My son is, my 78-year-old father is. If they're not easygoing, they got to get off the farm. And these were originally bred for the same reasons. These were family farmers working with pigs. These were often called orchard pigs. They let them out in the orchard to clean up. The other aspect that I'm looking for somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, I want them to know what they're doing in terms of things like breeding. I don't want to intervene in the litter, so they've essentially, in my view, bred out a lot of the mothering capabilities of the modern pig because they put them into farrowing crates. They don't need to do things like a head count, verbally communicate. These pigs do. They have retained a capacity to raise large litters without rolling over on them, without killing them, and caring for them. And that's the other thing that we see in what we select for and who stays on the farm and who breeds. So that's a little bit about the breed. What do we do for habitat? We only have, while there's a bunch of woods, we only have about 15 acres in pasture. Here was mistake number 830. When we first got the large blacks on the property, I read these articles online, people pushing the large black. We drove out to Missouri and got ours, and they said, hey, these things will graze on pasture and eat 80% of their food from pasture. And I believed it, and that's when my father again said, you're just not very bright. Because there's a biology to the pigs. They are, in fact, monogastric omnivores. They do not come with the miracle of the rumen to take pasture and convert that into protein. The reality is they need a solid protein source, and they're not going to get it from pasture. The other reality is that I don't care what they say, that they're softer on pasture. Yeah, sure. I have pictures. I didn't Photoshop them. They do graze, but they will also root. And so if you put them out on prime pasture, as I did, they're going to tear it up. As soon as it gets moist, as soon as they get to a place that is not dry, rocky soil, they're going to get into it. So what we have adopted to do is doing our wood lines, our pasture line. It maintains our fences well because they don't go through them, but they're underneath acorn. We provide an area that defines our pasture neatly, and we've also opened up a woodlot, about 5 acres, which to me is the natural habitat for pig. The temperatures are cooler, there's natural wallowing sources, and there's interesting stuff to do, which they need in order to keep me happy. The number of times I've driven up in the morning to feed and seeing somebody walking down the road at me, it's, you know, they get bored. If they get bored, they're getting out. Which brings me then to, so that's our habitat, that's why we do it. I'm looking for woodlot. I'm looking to keep them interested. These are natural, very positive foragers. They do get a fair amount of protein out of things like acorns and whatnot. So fencing is always the big debate. What do you do as a practical matter with pigs? I'm after rapid rotation as one element of just leaving the soil better than how I found it. Pigs, if you leave them in the same place, these things will just change it into a moonscape eventually, and they'll also essentially pulverize the soil, turn it into almost a dust, as they masticate the amount of energy they put into turning the soil. So I'm moving it rapidly. I'm trying not to burn the soil with the nitrogen. And we do a couple of things. We bring in the wood chips from like the tree services, and we just dump them along the wood line at about 1.5 2 foot. They'll turn that. It'll bring up moisture, and it'll bring up, you know, insects and shoots and all that kind of stuff. As I say, keep them interested and to keep the soil mitigated. I'm also after rapid rotation along the lines and in the woods. So I need a fencing technique that'll do that. We do kind of a hybrid system. Bottom line is it's electrical. We have a perimeter fence that's electrified, and we tap in. What you can barely see here are these kind of flexible webbing electrified fences. And some people say they're not going to honor them, but they do, with some exceptions. Sow goes into heat, you need a solution, and you got to watch out for the conspiracy. They will, you know, 3 or 4 of them literally start rolling sawdust onto the fence, and if you don't check every day to sort of replant this, we'll eventually go over it, they'll unroll it, they'll walk over it. It's a conspiracy. So this allows me, though, to essentially work off a hard panel block system. I take hog panels and hard fencing, so I don't have to turn. These are not electrified. They allow me to back a trailer in or bring food in, and then go through that lock system to whatever area the pigs are in, to do feeding, to change housing, bedding, whatever. And then I can use these flexible fencings to essentially to spin, to rotate off of that. It's more efficient. Literally, I can move these fences alone. Ideally, with my son, we can really reconfigure the pasture, the setup very quickly and easily. So that's our fencing system, with the exception of winter. We retreat towards hard paddocks close to the barn for obvious reasons, watering and feed. This has just been a trial and error process where we have been slowly building small Fort Knoxes. The real problem is, as I say, when a sow goes into heat, we reinforce even that with hog panels, just lashed to what we have as hard paddocks. Feed. Again, I'm not saying it's the right way, it's what we do. We are interested in trying to intervene in the waste system. When people talk about feeding their pigs garbage, I do not feed our pigs garbage. I don't go to restaurants and just get slop because I'm concerned about meat being a disease vector. It doesn't store well. But I am interested in just participating in mitigating the waste of food. So we go to dairies, and our primary protein source is yogurt, milk, and whey. And it's just labor intensive. We drive around and we collect this stuff. 2, we collect segregated barrels of fruits and vegetables from grocery stores. In other words, just the produce department. We're not asking them to dump anything else, and they cooperate with that. We go through probably 2 barrels a day of just really nice looking, I don't know why this stuff's thrown out, but we pick it up, we use it. We then mix that with pig's fly bread at the outlet, their kind of commercial return. And the reason we get that is because there's no preservatives in it. So the yogurt is organic, the bread, not organic, but doesn't have any preservatives, and the vegetables just look damn good. I do cut in a grain, but at relatively low doses. I do that for consistency because the other stuff is up and down, and I do it for protein. It has a decent protein level, and they just need it. I mean, I'm after decent growth rates too. I'm probably on average a month longer than a commercial pig, but I'll take it. Housing, there's a bunch of solutions out there. I have one. It's not very good. It takes a lot of maintenance, but because I'm after rapid rotation, there's always this tension of strong versus light, and I'm still trying to figure out that balance. I basically build a wooden structure with a metal roof on skids, so I can easily drag it with my tractor. I do more small ones, so I can get them through the woods, get them through my paddocks if I'm bringing them in the winter. In the summer, it's just straight on soil. As long as it's reasonably dry, I'll just let them build their own nest. They'll bring in stuff and nest. In the winter, I do basically a system of kind of a mix of poor quality hay, cut shredded paper, and other stuff, wood chips, in order to kind of get a pack that generates heat underneath them. As long as that stays dry on the surface, they've done well. So that is our in sum. I know I'm running over on my time. What we're doing for pork and kind of how we're doing it. Just very briefly, the entrepreneurial end of the thing. A number of years ago, sitting in a bar where I meet most of my friends, a bartender said, "You need to meet this guy. His name is John Medlin." He knew I was raising pigs. John had just returned from the Netherlands, where he's a cordon bleu trained chef. And he had just returned from the Netherlands, where he lived with a fourth generation charcuterist and butcher family, learning how to butcher and how to do charcuterie. Charcuterie is simply processing, a traditional technique of processing meats and curing and smoking. And so long and short of it is we met and we quickly signed up for the ag business course at the extension and went through probably 5 business plans. And this is what we settled on, is at the nucleus is just a commercial kitchen in Dover. And our notion was that we just needed to get vertically integrated. He needed a piece of the farm, I needed a piece of the production element, and we both have a piece of the distribution. It riffs off of corporate food, but we do it in a very small local way. We try and source exclusively from local farms. We're involved taking sourcing from about more than 20 now. And the nucleus is simply this commercial kitchen that's dedicated to what he does as what I consider a food artist. We did things like pour an acrylic floor. People talk about regulations of local food safety. You know, we could have gotten away with a vinyl square floor, and we said, you know, the people we're selling to are our families, our friends, and our community. The one thing we did not want, based on our research, a floor with any seams. We poured a 3-inch acrylic floor. We put in whistles and bells, choppers, grinders, casers, and the beauty of a custom smoker, because he smokes everything. And we're trying to use that as simply a launching point for various undertakings. And you know, what we do is farmers markets, we do a restaurant, we do catering, and I'm trying to bring in another LLC, which just brings in farmers who would want to have an equity piece in the production and take their own label home and do with it what they want. So in a nutshell, that's what we're doing. And that's way past my time.
Thank you very much, Jack. Okay, now we have Donna-Lee Wood to speak on the subject of local dairy, goat-based dairy and cheese product and so forth. Donna-Lee.
Thank you. Well, our story sort of mirrors his story. As a kid, I'd always had this dream of having a farm. And when I was 54, driving home, my husband and I are both architects, and we had our business up in York, Maine. I realized that if I didn't do something, I was going to die and never do it. So I passed a real estate agent, drove in, put the house on the market, went home and told my husband I put a house on the market, and he said, okay. It's very easy. And I said, well, we want to buy a farm. He said, fine. So we looked, the house sold in 5 days, and we looked and we found Lee, New Hampshire, and realized that the place that we wanted was on York Lane, and I'm Donna-Lee, so it had to be. Anyway, I thought that I was going to get old and raise sheep and spin and make tapestries. So we got these sheep, we got the chickens, we had the horses, the whole thing. Even got some geese, that was a loss. And I got these sheep, and I envisioned these little white puffy things out in the fields, nice and clean, and they were filthy all the time. All that lanolin on the wool just sucks all the dirt right out of the air. So my granddaughter got some goats, and the neighbors wouldn't let her keep the goats because the little baby goats were making noises. So she gave them to us. And at the same time, a girlfriend gave me a goat to babysit while she traveled to milk. So, okay, I enjoyed the milking. I loved it. So we raised these little goats up. You know, we started just kept playing with it, and I had so much milk, I didn't know what to do with it. So I'd make cheese. I put cheese in a cooler beside the road, and I told people, I gave a little thing, free cheese, but they had to fill out a little questionnaire. I would take the questionnaire back, incorporate their responses into the cheeses. I didn't want to pasteurize because pasteurization kills both the good and the bad pathogens. So I'm starting to develop some kind of, I was so ignorant about this whole thing, starting to develop some kind of priorities. I began to realize that I was making the cheese, and then I would put it in refrigerator to age it, because by law you have to age raw cheese for 2 months in an environment that is an 84% humidity and a 54-degree temperature. So I tried to do that in the refrigerator, and it didn't work. It just didn't work. So I realized that I was onto something. You know how when you're doing these things, you sense that you're onto something? You know what I mean? And you keep on going, as ignorant as you are. You just keep on going. So I got the state involved, and the state came and checked and inspected. He guided us, and he was tremendous, a great help. And we became a state-inspected dairy. Right now, we have 64 goats, and we have, when I left tonight, we had 15 babies. When I go back, there may be more, because we're kidding right now. And we have 3 bucks. And we breed. We breed from September through January, and we breed, and this year we bred in 4 different groups, so that 1 buck would breed a group, and then another buck would breed a group, so that we aren't hit with 100 kids at one time, because these kids are all fed with a bottle. It's really important, as you were saying, it's really important that these goats relate to us, and that we relate to them. They all have their personalities. And if we let them go wild, or if we let them start developing a relationship, a mother and a kid relationship, we have lost that unity with those animals. And you need that, because we're in with the animals, as he is. We have kids that come, the school systems bring kids to the farm. And the animals have to work with those kids. They have to, and if they don't, they're out of there. If they show any kind of aggression, they're out of there. So, anyway, Phil and I are driving, my husband and I are driving to Manchester, and I've got this dilemma going back to the refrigerated, the cheese. When I refrigerated the cheese, it kept drying out. I looked down over in Candia, and I saw that place there where they sell the big containers that go on the ocean ships. I said to Phil, we're going to buy one and bury it. So we drove down in, and we bought one. They brought it back. It's a 40-foot long container ship, and we buried it. So when we dug down, the topographical line here is about up here, down here, it's down here. We dug down in, the man brought this thing down. If you know York Lane, does anybody know York Lane? Narrow, really narrow. This great big huge truck comes down with this thing, and all these tires go sucked up, I don't even know what the words are. So he gets this thing down in, and he gets it like this far away from the stake that I put on it. And the men are there, Al LaRoche, you all know him, with the dirt, bringing the dirt and bring the dirt. And I go inside the cheese cave, or go inside the container, and it's starting to belly in. And I said, okay, we got to stop, realizing that it's a point system. So, and there's only 4 points of structural maintenance on this, in this container. So we stopped it, went inside, built a huge structural system inside. That ended up being my shelving. And then we continued the 6 feet of soil on top, and when I'm inside there, the sheep and the donkeys, we have donkeys because donkeys kill coyotes and coyotes kill goats. We have the sheep and the donkeys are on top of my head, 6 feet. I hear them bang, bang, bang around up there. So anyway, one of the biggest things of this whole thing is the business aspect of it. Not only do we have a business, but we are introducing a raw goat milk firm cheese that people don't even know. And we are novices and trying to raise goats, and we're learning about animal husbandry. For example, what fencing not to use. We had a little goat jump over the fence the other day, got a leg caught, broke a leg. The vet came, took the goat. He, as a matter of fact, carried the goat in the car himself, took it down to his place. Now we've got a goat running around with a cast. You know, and it just goes on and on and on, and all the issues that we're always dealing with. When we have these kids, we have both, needless to say, boys and girls. This year we had a tremendous number of boys, and they go off for meat. We have a man that comes up from Massachusetts, and he buys them all. And it's a very simple process. It's a heart-wrenching thing. But one of the things that we've always said is that this is going to be a business, and you can't be wimpy, you can't be emotional over the animals, otherwise it doesn't become viable. It's just you would not believe the costs that you go through raising animals. It's absolutely mind-boggling. The cost of grain that we have to pay for is crazy. You know, I don't know where it's going to go. I don't really know where it's going to go. But goats need the grain. They need hay, and we use local hay. We buy all our grain from Poulin, and that's the company that we have found that has the best quality and sustainability in their grain. You get some from the other companies, and you can't always depend on what you're going to get. So when we started doing the cheese, because it is such a unique product, we had to introduce other ways of using the goat milk. So we started making the goat milk soap. Now it's just a pure goat milk and oils. Again, it's unpasteurized. And we chose different shapes. There's all these different shapes and different scents. And we're really looking at the nutritional benefits from goat milk. How does it affect our bodies? It's very hard to find the information that we need to back up what we're finding, but when people come and tell me, we do a lot of farmers markets, I deal a lot with the public. I need to know what people's input is to what we're doing here. And they come and they tell me stories about using these soaps. It's an amazing thing. Your skin, being the largest organ of your body, you know, it's taking things in and it's putting things out, sweat and all these kinds of issues. And it's an amazing thing with the goat milk, because it's packed with goat milk. This here is this is our Shabar cheese. This is a brushed rind cheese. Well, they call it brushed rind. I rub it. There really isn't a classification for it. This one is aged in sea salt. We have a bulk tank. The milk comes out of the goats. We have a little milking machine, and the milk goes right into a bulk tank, and the milk is dropped down to the temperature immediately in the bulk tank. Yeah, this one here. We have some samples of the goat milk if you want to try it. If you're concerned about it, you know, it's not going to hurt anybody's feelings, but it's just you might want to take some. Or maybe not. That's fine. So this cheese here is aged in sea salt, and it's made in our cheese vat. When we started out with little tilt kettles. We had 2 10-gallon tilt kettles, and then it began where I had to make cheese every day, and it didn't work. with our schedule of taking care of the animals and doing the farmers markets and running the business and all the other stuff that you have to do with life. So this cheese here is a pure goat milk cheese. There's nothing in this but just goat milk and starch and the sea salt. That's all it is. We do other cheeses where we have additives. We do a sage. We do some caraway. We do 30 or 40 different types of cheese. I get an idea, and we just play with it. I love working with chefs, coming up with ideas, really getting creative about the type of cheeses that we're making. We're into now, our new product now is making a yogurt, and there is some of that there. If people want to try some raw yogurt, it is just pure goat milk and culture. And the restaurants are beginning to pick up on this raw yogurt. Sharon, could you hand the raw yogurt when you're done there, please? We are also playing around now with, we do a goat milk fudge, a line of candy, and we have a new product out, it's called waddles. And that, you know, these things hang down on goats, they're called waddles, and nobody knows what they're for. So they look, the candy looks a little bit like the waddles, so we call them waddles. It's a goat milk caramel. There are some spoons there too for the yogurt if they want. If anybody wants, is anybody here thinking about getting a goat or having a goat? You never want to do just one animal. They've got to be they're herding animals. There's a lot of care to a goat. You know, they just don't go out and eat tin cans. They have to have their feet clipped, and that's a really important aspect of animal husbandry with goats. When you taste that yogurt, do you get the freshness? Yeah. It's good. Yeah. It's different. The coats we curry, we brush our goats. We keep track of their skin. If they start getting really dry skin, they get olive oil in their feed. They get a lot of molasses. There's a lot of goodness in molasses that we give to the goats, and that really keeps their coats nice and shiny. We try to keep the stalls clean as much as possible. We have a sick bay, an area that if a goat has anything wrong with it, it goes in that sick bay so we can keep track of it. Any questions? Does anybody have any questions about care of goats that we don't want to keep for the end? Anybody here that wants to raise goats?
If you talk a little about enclosures.
Yes, thank you. We have wooden barns. We have a couple of wooden barns, and we keep the goats in, which used to be horse stalls. But now we have found that by making big stalls, you know, we've got the lower barn, and it's like 30 feet long by 15 feet wide. That all the goats will go in there and stay right in there. They love. It's like taking a bunch of worms and putting a bunch of worms in a knot in a ball. They'll do that themselves. You have to really look to see what head goes with what tail, because they just sleep in around one another. They just love it. And we use shavings and then the hay. We get the big bales of hay. They will spread that around, and they'll also use that as bedding.
Hay is straw.
Straw, yes, that's good. But the hay, they're eating it at the same time. Because then we've got the donkeys, and then the donkeys eat the hay that the goats don't eat. So, you know, we're sort of not wasting this hay. We have a 2-fence system. We started out with a wooden fence with a post and the 3 boards, you know, the 1x6 boards, and they kept sneaking through and going underneath. So now we have wire that goes over that, you know, that sheep fencing. So we do both of that. Yeah, and that works well. But they're going to find a way to get out. They love to do that. The other day I came out of the barn, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw this brown something walking up the back driveway. There they were, 30 of them, walking right up the driveway, yes. Yeah. They found a little teeny weeny hole, you know, and they're herding the animals. They're a lot of fun to be with. They just follow the leader. They're a lot of fun to be with. So we'll save any more questions for after, and yes.
Well, if they're herding animals, is it not good to raise just one then?
That's exactly right. Yeah. They want to be together. They really do. And when you get a couple of goats that will go down to the back pasture down there, all of them will start going down.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Donna-Lee.
you.
In the interest of time, Joanne will take questions on nutrition in a few minutes, but won't make a statement. But I'd like to turn it over to Ted at this point.
Great. Thank you. So tomorrow, I'm actually getting half a pig from Birch Hill Farm. So it's exciting to be working with them tonight. And I wish I had this similar chart of cuts of meat, but if I can do this verbally, maybe you can follow my head. So we have like 4 sections. The leg, or it's called the fresh ham. And in the grocery store, you'll see shank end. So there's 2 ends to the ham. It's a 220-pound pig, which is probably live, I think, 3. We're getting a carcass of 220 pounds, but live.
About a 73% yield, so.
Right. So that's what is it, 300 to 320. Something.
Is that the half or the whole?
Actually, tomorrow I'm getting a half, but I'm getting half of a 220-pound pig. So I'm getting 110 pounds tomorrow, which is literally half a pig, head to tail. So, but the farmers are trying to raise 220 pounds thereabouts, a hanging weight, and that's going to give us the best yield. When I get a call, do you want to have a pig, a whole pig? So the first question I ask is, what size is it? I've gotten some that are too small, and then the yields become undesirable. I even got something that was just, there's not much bacon. And so if I can't even get bacon out of it, then so the little suckling pigs are 30, 40 pounds. But that's a family party as opposed to getting cuts. So
Still a good party.
it's definitely a good party. Years ago, I roasted a whole pig, but I think that was not 200 plus. That was more somewhere in the 120 to do a whole roasting pig, and that takes 12, 14 hours. But again, it is a lot of party. So, and a long day. So we have the ham, and then we work our way into the midsection. So that has the loin, the chops, and the sirloin. And everybody knows the pork chops. I also do at the restaurant pork porterhouse, which is swaying off of the beef porterhouse is what made that famous. So that's the strip loin and the tenderloin part, and they occasionally sell these. You'll see them at butchers, but so a 12-ounce, about 1 inch thick pork porterhouse, and so it's probably about 4 or 5 inches wide. You know, it's good. It's a good piece of meat. It cooks really quickly on the grill, and so that's what the midsection gives you the chops. You can cut the loin. Is a boneless loin, about 6 pounds, or you can leave the bone in. You can do bone-on chops, bone-on rib chops. You can do boneless cutlets. The loin is, you know, the key to having a great party. You can do all sorts of stuff with that. You can brine it and smoke it, and you can have Canadian bacon, which I guess isn't really smoked, but brined and smoked is really good for your poached eggs, for the eggs bennies. Your eggs Benedict has the Canadian bacon, which comes from the loin. I also like take the tenderloin out, and the tenderloin from this size pig might be also about a pound and a half, thereabouts. Some are 20, 24 ounces, 28 ounces. But not very big, maybe about 10, 12 inches, and about 3 inches in diameter. And so you could feed 2, 3 people, depending, well, yeah, more than 2 people. If it's 24 ounces, you could do 3 or 4. Depends how you want to do it. And that cooks really quickly, has no fat on it. Well, if you trim the fat off. And what you buy mostly in the butchers and the grocery stores is fat, is defatted. And that, so you like to wrap that in bacon. So that's the real classic dish. Wrap that in bacon, sear it, roast it, serve it. And thank God for all these wonderful farmers giving us meat trichinosis free. So in the restaurant we have, still have perception of needing overcooked dry pork. And that's not necessary. We haven't had trichinosis in this country since the 40s or thereabouts. And it's okay to have some rosy pink in your pork. Not necessarily medium rare, but definitely medium. Medium being 130, 135 degrees on a thermometer. I do notice that a lot of cookbooks and shows and magazines overdo it on the temperature range. Rare is 120, 125. Medium rare is 125, 130. Medium, 135. Medium well, 145. And well done, 150 plus. 150, no color. They say when the chicken is done, when the juices run clear, and that's the temperature at which the blood in the juices run clear that's 145, 155 degrees. So there's no more coagulated blood, it's just juice. Easier to see in chicken maybe because it's not red meat. And in meat and in beef you want some medium rare. You definitely want some medium rare. So very good to have the medium rare in the pork. We like it that way. I also keep going. So we have the shoulder and the Boston butt. And so the shoulder, often broken down for sausage, for grind. Meatloaf is really good. We do a 50-50 blend of beef and pork in the meatloaf. And I may be doing that this Saturday night. I think so. So we're getting 2 half pigs to 2 different farms this week, and we're going to have a big, we just did smoked ribs. Here, I'm off on a tangent. We did smoked ribs on the weekend. I have to get half a pig every 2 weeks, so I have to stockpile them. And then I have enough for a special. And so the weekend we had smoked pork ribs. So the belly, on the other side of the loin is more towards the back, but on the front side of the loin is the belly. And the belly gives you the bacon. And in between the bacon and the loin are the ribs. So there's, we pull the ribs off and you have the St. Louis ribs, and the ribs that are closer to the back are the baby back ribs, are the ones that you leave on for your bone-on pork chop of the loin. So that's the eye of the loin with a little chop hanging off of it. That's your baby back rib if you leave the whole thing. So what I do, and again, I was intimidated by this whole process. I have just a boning knife. I eventually, I went out and bought a 19-inch hack saw. It's a boning saw. It's made for cutting bones. It was only $45, $50 at the restaurant supply store. It's a common practice thing to have. So that and a cleaver, and that was also about $40, $50. And it's a Dexter, very heavy cleaver. You've seen these in all the movies and everywhere. So, and that's it. That's the three tools that I have, and I can break down this pig in less than an hour into usable cuts. So I take the back ribs out so that I have baby back ribs, I have St. Louis ribs, and then I have bacon. So I cure the bacon 5 days in sugar and salt, and that's a 50-50 sugar-salt mix. And I put in some herbs and garlic, and you can do whatever you want. And I think that's going to be the answer of craft butchery in the future is this is our house bacon. This is what makes us different, this farm, this restaurant, this butcher shop. What is different about us as opposed to the homogeneous bacon or homogeneous meat out there. So I think that's going to, we are already starting to see it. So now we have ribs, which I have to stockpile, I mentioned. I have bacon. We do, there's you cut it in half for a top and a bottom, or a half, or if there's a word, a small. I think it's called small. The top half is the small, I think. And so I sandwich those together, put it in a zip, in a trash bag actually, and that sits for 5 days. Then we rinse that cure off, and we smoke that for about 4 or 5 hours, about 200 degrees. And then I do it with the skin on. I think Popper does it with the skin on as well. And then I take the skin off, and then you can slice it for bacon and fry it. And at the restaurant, we put it into lardons, which are little tiny bacon, more than bacon bits. It's a French word, so you take the strip of bacon and you cut that into little tiny strips. And you fry those. And those go on a salad. And that salad, I should have made that salad tonight, I apologize, maybe I should next month, is the farmhouse salad on our menu, and it has a poached egg on it as well. So that's our signature salad at the restaurant, usually in a couple of different forms. So in the shoulder, I also, the one I just did, I boned out the shoulder and tied it so that it's now about 18, 20, 22 inches long and probably about 6 inches thick, or even thicker in some spot. I left the skin on, I tied it, and it's sitting in a brine for 4 to 5 weeks. We just did one, it was 5 weeks, and it came out really good. So that's in a 5-gallon bucket, and as I mentioned last month, the brine, 2.5 cups of salt in a gallon of water floats a potato, and that's what you need to brine with. So, and I do half that amount of sugar. So we do 2 gallons of water in a 5-gallon bucket, and 5 cups of salt, and 2.5 cups of sugar. And that's the ratio, but to that you can add anything you want, garlic and herbs and all the pickling spices in the world, and that's what's in the bucket, and it's labeled for don't open till Christmas. And then we take it out, we rinse it off, and we smoke it. So we like the smoked bacon, the smoked ham. But you could boil it, or you could braise it, and so that it would be the French boiled ham. I haven't done it because I just like smoked ham, which you could. So going through the parts of the pig, and I left out the trotters and the head, which make great stock. The head, I cut the jowl out, or the cheek, and I salt that very similar to the way we do the bacon, but I add some red chili flakes to that as well. And that's called guanciale. Guanciale is an Italian-style bacon made from the pork jowl, and you have to slice that very thin. It really should age. Popper does a much, much better job at aging his products. They have the facilities to do that. We don't, but I do age it in the refrigerator, so it's at 38 degrees as opposed to being a little bit warmer. But that's the operation that I have. It does do really well. I've done it just dry, hanging it in the refrigerator for an additional 3 weeks to get it nice and firm. But I've also smoked it in between those stages, and I find that to be probably the best. So those are the parts of the pig. We really like the pig. The pig is affordable for us to buy, gives us lots of cuts off of it. I can pay for the whole animal through one Friday night of specials on the loin chops, or the roast loin. Sometimes they save 2 loins from 2 different deliveries and make one big one for dinner, for dinner special. There's pork. Maybe briefly, if that's a pundit of a joke, to talk about eggs. The wonderful world of omelets and quiches and frittatas. If I could only give you one piece of advice, I'd say don't rush it, don't use any high heat, use a medium to low heat, and making an omelet is pretty quick. It takes like 3 minutes, but don't go too high. Eggs are not supposed to be brown on the bottom like that. Don't be afraid to use some butter. It needs a lubricant in the pan. And a trick, if you haven't gotten used to flipping eggs, use a piece of bread in your pan, and you can practice. That's how we teach a young cook how to flip an egg. So you put just a piece of bread, any bread, doesn't matter, slice of toast. Just put it in, and you'll get the action. And you practice that with your green beans, and you practice that all day long until you get it. Because Once now you start playing with two over easy eggs, you'll go through a lot of eggs doing broken eggs. And it still happens every day, but you'll get used to it. Eggs have, there's a classic story of why does a French chef have the hat has so many ruffles in it, and that's for every different way you can cook an egg as a chef. So, oh, I have a better joke than that. Hold on. So there's custards are 3 to 4 eggs per quart of milk, or half and half, or cream, where you're ever headed. I didn't tell you that an omelet is the pan egg. A frittata is a quiche without a bottom crust. A quiche is an omelet baked in a crust. Once you know one, you know all 3. So it's like Mexican food. It's all the same. It's just how they put it in different vessels, right? Once you know one, you know them all. It's all the same. Quiche probably has more milk or cream or dairy products into it. The worst quiche I ever made was a chicken sesame quiche, which was terrible. Don't ever do that. So we make bread pudding, and the bread pudding is 3 quarts of milk. I use milk for the bread pudding, and half a loaf of bread and 9 eggs, so 3 eggs per quart. Half a loaf, give or take, depending on what size it is. Generously butter the pan. You can use a half to 1 cup of sugar, depending on what type of flavoring you're doing it inside. Cherries need more, cranberries need more sugar than blueberries, and chocolate maybe does hardly need any, so on like that. But that's the ratio. I bake it for about an hour with a foil cover, with a cover on it, and then take the cover off and do it for another half hour, 45 minutes. So it does take a long time. A lot of the custards, they need to be baked in a water bath. Again, slow and low is much better. A little bit of water, you cover the hole and leave that for 45 minutes. Creme brulee is about 45 to 50 minutes. Creme brulee, very similar ratios, 4 egg yolks for a pint to give you 4 portions. All of this has vanilla in it, has sugar in it, has everything else you want to put in it, but it's the ratios that you need to learn. And then the beginning of all of your desserts, lots and lots of desserts have eggs in it. The secret with egg whites, a lot of recipes will tell you, well, all of eggs, leave them at room temperature. How do you get an egg at room temperature? You're busy, I'm busy, we know that. Put it in some warm water in a bowl. So you take them out of the refrigerator and you put it in a bowl with warm water while you're getting a few other things. You're waiting for the oven to heat up. That will take the shock of the 38-degree refrigerator and bring them up to at least 50. And it's easier. They absorb other ingredients easier at room temperature, as most things do. I crack the egg yolks in my fingers and I don't have a special tool. I think it's redundant. You can do it that way. As long as you have clean hands, you wash your hands again. The eggs would go into the compost. At the restaurant, we have bread bucket for pig food only. We have compost for all the other vegetable scraps that is compost only. And then we have landfill, which is plastic and non-compostable, non-recyclables. And it's important because the farmer doesn't want to have meat products mixed in with the bread that's going to the food for the pig, which we buy back. We don't want to be feeding the pigs rotted table scraps. I don't know how long it's going to sit in the shed here. I don't know how long it's going to sit in the farm there. So it's bread only. And there's another bin that's vegetable scraps only. And the farmer can have that, but back and forth on that. So the doctor says to the patient, I'm really sorry, you have only 12 minutes to live. And the patient says, well, is there anything you can do for me, doctor? And he says, well, I can boil you an egg.
Thank you very much, Ted. So you need to get out your cell phones and make some reservations. Blue Moon Evolution and Poppers. Okay, we are running a bit over, but I'm sure some of you have some questions, and I don't want to deprive you of that. So now's the time to give us your questions. Yes.
This is a little bit maybe off the subject, but it's about eating local food. I have a really hard time since I've moved back here finding anyone that will take me out foraging. And I know that New Hampshire has a wealth of wild things. I did it once up in Tamworth at the museum, at the Remick, years ago when I lived up in Wolfboro. But in our area, I can't find anything about anybody who does that.
Where their mushrooms growing.
Well, not the mushrooms, but we just went out and picked greens, all kinds of wild things, and
Ben Tillinghast from New Roots Farm is an incredible forager that we buy some from his stuff, but he's wild about it. I mean, that part of the pun. He's great.
I'd love to do that, but I don't know enough.
Part-time, and he also works at the Bean. He bakes the bread down there. But he's a very accomplished forager.
Oh, I'll ask him the next time I was eating at the farmer's market. And the other thing I just wanted to mention, I think all of us now are buying like pork and all the local meats. And I think the trouble that I'm finding is I want all the local, fresh, healthy food, but I don't want to buy like pork that someone's raising so beautifully like you are, and then they slam all those nitrites in it, in their products.
I don't know how you guys feel about that issue. I'm going to be candid with you that this has been an ongoing internal debate in terms of what we do. And here's where we came down, is that the AMA study that originally generated the concerns about nitrates and nitrites were, essentially based on quantities that were used in the 70s. But the overall quantity has gone down dramatically. But then you reach a point of tension between, they're there for a reason, which is food safety. And so we've tried to strike a balance of eliminating it in certain foods that are simply less susceptible given an internal process of either curing or aging or smoking or hot smoking. But the ones that are more susceptible, we're continuing to use it, just at a lower rate. The other thing that the AMA study revealed was that there's kind of a counteraction of a very simple process of using citric acid, lemon juice. They say, and this is not just sort of wives' tale stuff, tends to negate the process, which is a cooking process to the nitrate and nitrite.
That's why they put in sodium erythrobate, I think.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so we've adopted that, and I got to tell you, we have tried to be very transparent in what we do, and customers ask us about this, and we say some of it does, some of it doesn't, but it all comes back to a food safety issue and a balancing act of they're there for a reason. If we can dial back down on the overall level of it, and try and experiment with using the lemon juice is where we're at. So I think it depends, is my answer. Maybe you guys have more informed.
Okay, some other questions? Yes?
I have a question about cow's milk, whether there's any place around here you can get pasteurized but not homogenized and like 2% or 1%.
There's Ips in Ipswich, I think it's called Appleton Farms, and they sell it at the Heron Pond Farm Stand, which is in Southampton. So I live in Kingston, it's a little bit closer for me. But they are going to be carrying it at a new, it's a new farm stand, which is a little bit easier to get to, the corner in Seabrook at 107 and 150, if you are on 95 and then taking a left on 107 and then coming towards Exeter. And there's a huge building that just went up. It's green and it's supposed to open in May. And so it's a farm stand. And he will be carrying it there. That is homogenized. Oh, you want not homogenized?
Not homogenized, it's pasteurized.
Oh, so theirs is both. Brookford's is neither.
Yeah, it seems to be it's either both or neither. And for health reasons, I want to know that it's pasteurized, but we've also heard that homogenizing makes the fat worse for you.
Well, if you buy goat milk, the particles are really small in the goat milk, so it's really healthy for you, better than cow's milk.
It's like this.
You should try it.
Yeah, for milk studies.
One obvious solution is you could find a source for raw milk and then pasteurize it yourself, I guess.
You gotta get a cow.
Or a goat, you still got
Are there other questions? Yes.
I was wondering, do you have any customers who can't drink cow's milk but can digest the goat's milk okay? Because I understand it has a different protein.
You know, we do a lot of farmers markets, as I said, and a lot of people come up, and it's amazing the percentage of people that are lactose intolerant, and they cannot do cow milk. And they can do goat milk. About 90% of those people can do goat milk because the molecular structure of goat milk is much smaller, and it's easily digestible. And the breakdown of the lactose, the chemical processing of the breakdown, is already 3 steps into the process with the goat milk versus the cow milk. So it makes a huge difference.
Anything else? Yes.
I just want to, it's not a question, but I want to make a comment on Chuck's comments about pig breeding.
Uh-oh.
There you go. You're not old enough to have been in college in the 50s, but that was about the time that pigs with 2, 2.5, 3 inches of back fat on them were going out of style, and it wasn't the pigs that we have today. I'll say the commercial pork industry has done a tremendous job of breeding pigs for pork that the housewife wants. Not just in this country, but all over the developed world. And a lot of that is genetics from your heirloom variety, your whatever you call them, heritage breeds. And I don't know how long it takes to be a heritage breed, but most of the breeds the commercial growers are using are 75, 100-year-old breeds, whether they're Durocs or Berkshires or Spotted Poland Chinas. They just bred them down so they've got maybe a ½ an inch of back fat because there's no market for lard. And they weren't breeding those lean pigs with what you call white tender meat because they wanted them to grow faster. They were breeding them because that's what the market wanted. What the commercial pork producer is putting in the market is a result of what the housewife wants to feed her family.
I think you can find a countervailing argument to that if you talk to certain chefs who, you know, when Popper went to Europe, one of the first things this guy who was a master butcher and a 4th generation charcuterie said, you know what the problem with the American pig is? They bred the pork out of the pig.
Yeah.
Is that it doesn't lend itself to certain styles of old school preparation. And while the modern housewife, as you put it, wants a
she doesn't want a pork chop with an inch of fat around the outside of it.
my wife would kill me for using the term, but I cook too. And when I'm coming home at 8 o'clock at night after work, I want something that's pre-prepped and easy to do. And to buy pork out of a little package, I got to say, is attractive. But to me, it affords a different flavor and it affords less options in terms of traditional approaches to preparation than these breeds do. Yeah. And I fully, accept your proposition that these are quality animals with different characteristics.
Just to get a faster growing pig. The faster growing pig offers a better conversion rate normally.
Yep, there's no doubt.
And that's what everybody's in business, whether you're in a small business like you or whether you're raising 5,000 pigs or 10,000 pigs, you're in it to make money.
I hear you. I just think at some point it becomes circular about whether or not the production is defining the marketplace and vice versa. Whether or not the marketplace really said, you know what, I want this really lean pig. It's not what I like. It's not what I'm looking for, but it's all that's available in
A lot of the uses for lard 50, 60 years ago are not there anymore.
I'll tell you, our primary production with utilizing marbled meat is not to produce lard. It's to produce a full range of really tail to snout products that have been made for centuries. And that is really hard to do with a pig that has no fat.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we've run about 20 minutes beyond our normal ending time, but it's been, I think, a good session. I think our speakers deserve a nice round of applause. And we look forward to the final program in the series in late May, when we'll be taking a good look at grains, among other subjects. Thank you very much.